on this Topcon 2G and the 1E, oftentimes the lever that operates the filter might get loose and it gets out of alignment, where if it's not in the right place, when you flip it to the color, it doesn't go all the way one way or the other because it's misaligned. Even though this is at the end, still got some more room, so it's not aligned. So this happens fairly often. This lever's small and it can get loose and then get out of alignment. One thing is important is that this little cover sometimes comes off. It only has a little bit of adhesive on the edges. And it can come off from overuse. So if we were going to realign this, first thing we'd want to do is secure our cover over the filter wheel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clean this old glue off with some acetone, and then I'm going to apply just a little dab of cement, whatever you have available. So we're going to do that, and then we'll concentrate on adjusting the alignment of the lever. Now that we have the cover secure, maybe yours is already secure, I'm going to loosen this lever, and here's what the lever looks like. It's got a little hole in it. That it's helpful if you can find something that can fit inside there so that you can get some good leverage on it. And it just so happens that this size of an Allen, if you have this size, 1.3 mil or 0.050, it will fit in there and you can get some good leverage on it. That's what happens most of the time, is that it's just tightened by finger tight, and so it gets loose. But at the end of this lever, it's got a point, and that point goes right into here. And this is like a little gear that operates the filter wheel. Underneath the filter wheel, it's got a little gear, and that fits on there. And so when you're turning the lever, you're turning your filter. So if you still have the cap on there, you can take it off. And if you don't have something to fit in there, you may have to just use some pliers to loosen it. And what we're going to do, we're going to take it all the way out to put something on these threads. And I'm going to use a little bit of polish, just a dab on the threads, so that when we tighten it, after we've aligned it, it might stay a little longer. So I'm going to loosen this one. Now try to get it in the center. Try to get it in the center where it's clear, so that when you put it back in, you'll have a good reference point. Okay, I'm going to put a little bit of oops, just a drop. Okay, now I'm going to want to line it up, so I'll turn my power on, and I can see that even though I've got this in the center, it's way off. So I'm just going to loosen it, turn it a little bit, and then hand tighten it and turn it whichever way it needs to go to get it back into the center. And one way we can tell if we're centered and the alignment is that on each end there should be a little extra. It should go all the way to the color and leave a little bit of room. And both sides should have the same amount of space. This has got a lot of space, but if I go back over here, I don't have any space. Okay, we have an issue here. The lever won't turn anymore. It will not go to the blue filter, and it's stuck and it's loose. So something's going on inside here. Now underneath the filter wheel, it's got little detents under each color, and on top of the gear that the lever screws into, there's a little bearing, and that coincides with the detents. So something is wrong with that bearing is not there, or something, or the detents are bad, something. So we're going to have to take it apart. You probably won't have to do this, but this is what we've got to do. So underneath here, we're going to take this apart to get to it. Okay, we took the little E-ring off the top, E-clip, C-clip. There's an Allen screw under here. Take that off. We're gonna, because this is a 2G, it's LED, so we need to take this apart. Take this cable off. And then we've got to remove 4 screws, 4 Phillips in the 4 corners to take that assembly out. Once you've taken those 4 corner screws out, you can pull this assembly out of the way. Put this to the side. And I can tell someone's been in here before because this screw is a little bit boogered, like someone's been adjusting it. But this is the diaphragm wheel, and it's got a detent with this, and it has a screw under it so it can turn, and this is a little cam so it can go one way or the other. This is a little cam, and it can turn one way or the other, and that adjusts your diaphragm wheel when that needs adjusting. You can see it. It's a cam. Going to have to take this center screw out, but remember we've got a spring and a bearing here that we'll have to take note of, and be careful when you're working around your diaphragm that you don't touch it, otherwise you're gonna put debris on your diaphragm, and it's hard to clean after you've all put it all back together. So we're going to remove this screw, take off our diaphragm wheel so that we can look at our filter wheel underneath it and this gear and see what's going on underneath. Okay, we've taken our top screw off, our diaphragm wheel, the bearing is, the gear is fine, the bearing inside the gear, that's also a detent bearing, that's okay. Looking underneath, looks like we've got some issues. Oh boy, doesn't look good. Well, I think the lens is in correctly. So it's not a lens issue. Something must have happened in here. Perhaps when it was worked on before, it wasn't put back together the correct way. So we'll have to, going to clean this filter off and put it back together. I think I know what happened here. It had gotten so far off that where the gear should have been in the middle, and it was adjusting like that, we were all the way over here, so that when we were trying to turn to the next color, it was going completely off of the gear. So the real issue was that it had gotten so far off that it was way off of center, and that's why it wasn't working. So we're going to loosen this and put it somewhat in the middle and hand tighten for now and put everything back together. We've got to put our filter wheel in here, and then our so now we've got the lever more in the center of the gear, and now we can work with it. Now we can adjust our detent for the filter wheel according to the cover. In putting this back together, this is going to be an issue for me, this spring and this bearing, while I'm trying to put the diaphragm wheel on and the filter wheel in here, lining it up with the gear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little mark on this cam and take the spring and detent bearing off. That's a 3mm bearing. Take this screw out that holds this cam, and then I can insert it later. Well, actually right now I can just leave it there and then later take it off and insert the spring with the bearing after I've inserted and screwed the diaphragm and filter wheel on. So now that that's out of the way, I'm going to try to line everything up and get that screw right in the center. I'm going to try to keep the gear in the middle. Place the diaphragm wheel right on this. Okay, I think we've got the filter wheel lined up. Of course, we don't have our bearing for the detent yet, which we will put in next. This is tight. Now we'll take this. Okay, I was able to get it back in. What I did was turn the diaphragm wheel to where there was a detent, and then the bearing would naturally fit in there while I pushed in this holder in here. And then because I had marked earlier where it was, I put it back in the same place and then tightened the screw. So now the diaphragm is detenting and the filter wheel is fairly close. But we'll have to tweak it once we get it all put back together and according to the cover. And I will put it back in and with the 4 screws and the cover. And later on, if you're going to have to adjust the diaphragm a little bit, you can remember you can loosen that screw and turn this little cam to adjust the diaphragm. If that's before you put it back in, make sure your brass washers are in place. That spacing is important, so make sure they're in there. And if your slits weren't clean, you might want to clean those real quick too while you're here. place. Back in. Four screws. Even though you have your 4 screws in, the reason why you have this cam adjustment is because there's space that this whole assembly can move around. And so if you were able to mark it before you took the 4 screws out to get it as close to its original position or not, or try to center everything and tighten it up, and then we'll see. And later on, remember you can always do a lot of adjusting by these 2 screws, loosening these and turning this whole upper assembly, and you can get some very good alignment that way too. But we're going to try to center this assembly before we tighten up the 4 screws. Okay, my alignment was off a lot, so I went ahead and loosened those 4 screws back up so we can move it. I want to try to get it back to somewhat close to what it was. So I've loosened those, and then I can put it back on. Put a focus rod in and look through my binoculars, and as you can see, you can move the light. What I'm going to try to do is get it centered on this focus rod and with a complete circle. And so I'm going to look through my eyepieces and see if I can get the circle to be centered in my view the best I can. And I'm going to, once I get it there, I'm going to hold it and then try to tighten, and then tighten those 4 screws underneath while I'm holding it. Okay, once again, for the alignment, to get your light in the center of your view, I've loosened those 4 and turned the assembly to get the light in your best view possible, and tighten that down. And then your slits might be off, so that's where you would loosen that screw and turn your cam, and that will move the slits one way or the other, so that when you're opening and closing, they're equal. And then for your final alignment, the 2 screws up here where you can move the whole assembly to get it back to where it was. So it's quite a bit of alignment. If possible, don't go into here. Don't loosen these screws and go in there. Hopefully your only issue with your handle will be that it just needs to be aligned and retightened. And once you have it tight and you've gotten it tight with your lever, then put your cap back on. I'll just show you the diagram real quick that we were just looking at. Here's our lever screwing into the collar with the cap. Here's our cover. and the seal, the cover doesn't have a little decal on it, so you have to get the decal on top of the cover as well. It's got the 3 colors on it. And unfortunately we went deeper, and here's that gear, and this is the detent bearing for the fixation wheel, and that's that. That's probably way more than you want to know, but it's there in case you're ever going to do that. And then here's the parts list for the diagram that I just showed you. So normally it's not that big of an issue. So be careful what you're doing, think about it, and do what you can. You might find that it's unable to stay in the spot you wanted it to, because it's already made an indentation on the gear, and it's going to go back into its original place. And as long as you can get the full filter on both colors, and if you can't get the space to be the same on each side, well, that's just going to have to be how it is. And as long as it detents fully in each color, then you're okay. You'll just have to live with the fact that it's already made its factory indentation, and it's going to go back there. Even if you try to tweak it a little bit, it's still going to go back there. Don't forget to tighten it up with your whatever you're putting it in here. Tighten it up. And put your cap back on. And if you had put a little polish on the threads, that it might help it from coming loose again, but if you tighten it, it should stay on there. If you put a little bit of torque on there with something like this, it should stay there.